All right, welcome back everybody to the Food Waste Prevention Week webinar series. If you were able to join us earlier this morning, we had some great updates from the EPA Region 4 and some of those states on the different initiatives and programs that they have going on for food waste prevention, and then what they've got going on for this week for the Food Waste Prevention Week. So we're glad if you stayed with us through the break, and we're excited about what is coming next. So just to reiterate, if you weren't here for the first webinar, my name is Caleb Powell, and I'm an environmental scientist for the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation, and I'm going to be hosting the webinar today for our wonderful speakers. Everyone is muted upon entry to reduce the amount of background noise, but if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to ask those in the chat, and let me go ahead and just send one so everyone knows where the chat box is. And we really do hope that you have questions. We want this to be a casual training session where we learn about the different initiatives and programs, and then hopefully you have questions to help you better understand everything that's going on and everything that's going to be talked about. So also, when we get to the question and answer portion of the webinar, there also is a little hand emoji on your right side above the chat or below the participants field, and you can, whenever I ask, if you want to actually ask your question in person, you can hit that and I will unmute you so you can ask that to our wonderful guests. So just very quickly to welcome us again, I'm going to pass it on over to Elaine Fiore, and she can sort of tell you what you can expect for this webinar.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Fiore of the Food Conservation Alliance and Broward County Public Schools. I have the honor of spearheading Food Waste Prevention Week. So on behalf of our planning team, we would like to welcome you and thank you for choosing to join us today. The intention of the week's webinar series is to complement our social media campaign going on for Food Waste Prevention Week to further raise awareness and inspire action to reduce food waste. This week has evolved in collaboration, and so we are very excited to be able to collaborate with all of you as well. It's a great space for all of us to come together in community, to learn from each other, as well as leaders in the field. So as a side, if you haven't already, and we'll put it in the chat, if you would follow us on social media at SaveTheFoodFL and repost anything that you like. Policy, we're super excited for this session as well. This morning's was wonderful, and now we're going to take a look at policy, and policy really is the way to reducing food waste on a major scale. We're seeing huge strides in states that have reclassified food as recoverable materials. So we're beyond excited to have the opportunity to learn more about all of this from Molly Cohen with the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic, and also the high school students from Virginia Beach who are leading policy change in Virginia. So, after this session, during the last session of the day, we will be talking to some of our MVPs of reducing food waste and addressing food security, our food banks, and they will also be sharing with you a little bit more about the Food Waste Prevention Week's Food Bank Challenge. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Molly.
Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Is everyone able to hear me?
Yes.
Just want to get some confirmation because I was having some technical difficulties earlier. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Elaine, for putting on this wonderful event, and Caleb for helping to organize everything. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Molly Cohen. I am a clinical instructor with the Harvard Law School Food Law and Policy Clinic, and here to talk to you all today about reducing food waste and increasing food recovery, and specifically sort of what opportunities are available for your states and localities. So just briefly a little bit about the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic. We have a dual mission. Firstly, our goal is to educate law students about the laws and policies impacting the food system. And secondly, we provide legal and policy guidance and advice to our clients and partners. So we work with nonprofits, government agencies, entrepreneurs. We'll work with the Hunger Relief Organization to identify laws and policies that are impacting food donation, and then maybe we'll work to change those laws. So we work in 4 major areas, but one of our biggest areas is around reducing food waste, and that's why I'm here speaking with you all today. So just wanted to give you a little bit, a bit more background on some of the projects that we do. We've worked on issues with local food policy councils. We've worked on statewide issues, national issues. We even have a big global project around food donation around the world. I'll provide a bit more detail on that near the end of the project. We work on issues around the Farm Bill. We're all gearing up for the 2023 Farm Bill. And then we work with local organizations around issues related to access to healthy food and ensuring that food systems workers who produce the food that we all eat, that they have fair labor conditions and access to appropriate compensation. So a little bit of talking, want to move a little bit into the food waste issue. We've done a lot of work related to food waste in the past decade. We've been working on this essentially since the clinic began about 10, 11 years ago. And we work with clients, as I mentioned. We work with people from Boston to Bangalore. We do a lot of work with local, jurisdictions and institutions. We work on the state level. We work on the federal level. And we also are now working on a big global project. I just put up a couple of the publications that we've worked on in the past. We worked on a state toolkit around sort of waste reduction strategies broadly, and also stuff about organic waste bans and food safety. So with that, I want to move us just into a bit of background on food waste. I know I don't want to cover anything that was covered earlier this morning by EPA, Region 4, so I'm going to keep it very brief, but just want to say that, we all know that food waste is a huge issue. About 40% of food that is, that is purchased is wasted or produced is wasted. And, each family is, spending about $1,400, or maybe that number actually was recently updated to $1,800 a year in food that, they don't end up eating, which, is a huge issue both, on the environmental side, but also for consumers, who shouldn't be wasting their hard-earned money. So I do just like to include this picture. This was taken during, at the start of COVID-19, and it was a giant field of onions just rotting because it just wasn't needed because, COVID-19, I really think, helped us grapple with these issues of food waste in our supply chains. And, I think there's a lot more interest and energy now in terms of trying to reduce food waste and also understanding how reducing food waste can not only help the environment, but also help, reduce food insecurity, which is also a huge issue in the country. So with that, I want to turn to, this food recovery hierarchy. And this is an image, if you haven't seen this 100 times yet today, I'm sure you will see it 100 more times. We actually have a magnet of it on our fridge in the office, which, really makes you think when you clean out the fridge. But I think the really important thing just to take away from this image is that, there are many different ways we can tackle food waste and food recovery, but that there are some ways that are more preferred than others. Obviously, we just want to not produce excess food in the first place. I, as a consumer, don't want to buy excess food. And then we want to make sure if we do have excess food, we're feeding it to hungry people. And, all the way down, we roll down the hill to composting, and then as a last resort, landfill and incineration. So, and one of the things that, we have been working on a lot in our clinic is trying to figure out sort of what are these legal and policy issues that impact food donation. Law impacts food in so many ways because food is very heavily regulated. We have all sorts of laws around, production, transportation, distribution, sale, a lot of issues around food safety, misbranding, adulteration. And so because of that, we know that laws can either act as a disincentive, they can cause confusion, they can be a barrier to food donation, but we also know that laws can really be an incentive. They can drive change in behavior and habits. And one of the things that was really interesting is, we worked in a bunch of different, localities, states, on the federal level, internationally. And we sort of expected to find that each place would have their own unique issues. And they do to an extent, but one of the things that's really interesting is the ways in which a lot of the same policy issues keep coming up again and again. And so, the main issues that we've identified that impact, food donation are date labeling, so making sure that people aren't getting confused, and throwing out food, increasing food waste because they think food has gone bad. Liability protection, making sure that, donors understand and are protected if they do donate food. Tax incentives, food donation isn't free, so if we want people to waste less food, let's make a tax incentive for them. Right now, oftentimes throwing food in the landfill is free. And donating costs money, so let's find a way to make it more accessible for people to donate. Food safety, and again, we know that food donation is safe. The issue here is that we have laws that oftentimes serve as a barrier here because, our food safety laws are very protective, health inspectors are very risk averse, and so that can just be a barrier. And we're starting to see a lot of really exciting movement on organic waste bans or donation requirements. Again, that's a way that we can incentivize, even mandate that, producers, distributors, consumers, compost or donate food. I won't get into this too much, but if people are interested, I'm happy to talk about what are the laws and policies associated with feeding food scraps to animals. Lastly, there's some stuff that can happen around K-12 schools in terms of making sure that, their food waste is being addressed. And I know that Elaine, that's where she started a lot of her work, so I wanted to include it. And then lastly, issues of government support. So how can government support, incentivize food donation and reduce food waste? So now if we go back to our hierarchy, what you'll see that I think is just important to, I don't want to belabor this, but I think it's worth spending a moment on. There are going to be some policies that are going to be more preferred because they're going to tackle the issue higher up on the hierarchy. So date labeling for us is an issue we work on a lot because we think we can reduce food waste at the source if people understand when they do and do not have to throw out food based on date labels. Again, feeding hungry people, tax incentives, liability protections, food safety for donations, that can all work to increase food donations. And lastly, feeding food scraps to animals, right? That's right below. And then, we'll talk about this at the end. It's really exciting, but also a little bit hard to figure out where to put this on the hierarchy, which is waste bans and donation requirements, because they really, they can run the gamut, right? They can include all elements of this hierarchy. And so with that, I want to get into my first, major issue, which is date labels. I think date labels is something that it's really intuitive to us because we've all lived this as consumers. For instance, I just bought a thing of jam, like a huge jar of jam from Costco, and it said after it's been open 3 weeks, you should throw it out. And I happen to work in this field and sort of understand a little bit about this and know that that really doesn't make any sense. But, a lot of consumers don't. And what's really interesting about date labels, and again, we've been working on this issue for a while, and we didn't know this until we got started, is that date labels are found on most products. They use tons of different phases: sell by, best before by, use by, freeze by, and they don't really mean anything. They're set by the manufacturer. They're not federally regulated by any agencies. The only exception is infant formula. That's the only food in the U.S., at least on the federal level, that needs to have labels. And in general, food labels and date labels are really a suggestion of peak quality. So if you see a sell by or a best before, that doesn't have anything to do with the safety of the food. It's really just trying to tell you, this is the manufacturer saying, we know it will taste super delicious by this day, and if you eat it a day or a month after that date, it might taste a little bit less delicious. But it's certainly not saying that the food is unsafe to eat. So what's the issue? The issue is that there's tons of consumer confusion around this. They're super inconsistent state laws. So as I mentioned, there's no federal framework here, but states do have their own laws. 41 states require date labels on some sort of products. 20 states restrict the sale and donation after a date label has passed, even if that date label, as I just mentioned, is only about quality. Even more confusingly, some localities like Baltimore and New York, though they recently repealed it, have their own labeling laws. And so it just results in huge confusion. So, we did a study and we found that 84% of consumers discard food close to or past the date on packaging because they think it's about to go bad. We also know that grocery stores may refuse to accept or to sell food that's approaching the date label because they know that consumers won't purchase it. So it just ends up being a huge source of waste of this healthy food. So again, just don't want to belabor this, but we do know that we've done a 50 statewide analysis, and we found that 41 states require date labels on some products. 8 states require date labels related to the manufacturer's process, so not related to freshness or safety, but it might be like, oh, on an egg, for eggs, the eggs were packed on this date. 5 states require multiple labels on packages, and 11 states prohibit sale past the quality date. So, okay, there's clearly a lot of confusion around this. What can you guys do? Say you're a state or a locality, what can you do? There is a lot that you can do. We think that there are some best practices here, and we have been, we'll yell them from the rooftops as long as we can. But, one of the main things that we recommend, and, this is something that we want to see enacted, federal, state, whatever level we can get, is very clear differentiation between a safety label, which is something that is really about safety risk, and there are some foods that they need this safety label, but for the vast majority, food does not, and a quality label, right? And a quality label is just saying like, hey, the manufacturer thinks the food is extra delicious on this day, but after the fact, it's still fine to eat, right? And we want to make sure that that language is clear and that that language is consistent. So there's a lot more I can get into about whether we should mandate one label or both and what's sort of really practical. I'm happy to dive into this. It's a super interesting topic, but I don't want to get all in the weeds, and so we won't have enough time for other issues. But so what are other recommendations? We want to allow donation of food past the quality date. Again, we know that the quality date has nothing to do with food safety. It's just about sort of like peak freshness. Eating food after the quality date is completely fine, and we prefer to see that food eaten or donated versus being thrown into the trash. And lastly, education and awareness. This is such an important issue because, again, a lot of the issue is just that consumers are confused about what these date labels mean. So we are seeing some federal progress. I don't want to make it seem all doom and gloom. Some of the major food manufacturers got together and created an industry-wide standard that was adopted in January 2020. A lot of products now are using these new labels. The issue about this voluntary standard is that it's still, a lot of states have laws on the books that conflict. So there's still confusion because we have 27 states with laws that conflict. We in our clinic work with some, federal people in Congress. I'm blanking on their name. I guess we can call them Congress members, representatives, to introduce the Food Date Labeling Act in 2021, and that would require all manufacturers to include date labels on their products and to use one of 2 uniform label standards. And again, would mandate that people are using this sort of standard language best if used by and used by. And then, sort of beyond federal, we are seeing some action on the state level. We've worked with Massachusetts to introduce a bill that would, again, introduce this 2 systems of food labels. Right now, no states have any date label legislation that we think is a strong model. But if, say, you were working in a state and you are interested in trying to tackle this issue, please reach out. We'd love to work with you and talk with you about it. It's really one of the things that we focused on the most with our food waste work. Okay. So moving on from date labels, what's the next issue? Okay, so if we can't reduce food at the source, the next thing we want to do is to donate it to people who are in need. So what are the issues associated with donation? One of the things that we hear again and again is liability protection, right? We live in America, it's a litigious place, and businesses are afraid to donate in case someone gets sick and they're sued. The interesting thing is, again, we work internationally and we talk with some countries about this issue, and they look at us like, like we're like, totally bananas because they say, oh, no, like we don't sue people based on food, So this is, in some ways, not uniquely American, but it is certainly an issue that America deals with more than others. The good news is that there is federal and state legislation that is protecting people who donate food from liability, but it could always be stronger. So on the federal level, we have the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act, which protects food donors who donate food unless they act with gross negligence or intentional misconduct, essentially unless they're like really behaving poorly. There are some requirements. The food needs to be donated to a nonprofit in good faith. It needs to meet all quality and labeling requirements. It needs to be distributed to needy individuals, and the individuals who are receiving it should not have to pay for it. In addition to the federal liability protections, as I mentioned, all 50 states have some form of liability protection, and about 15 of those go above and beyond the federal protection. So they actually provide additional protection for people who are donating food. For instance, 15 states provide protection when the food is sold at low cost. And I'm happy to get into more why that can be really helpful. 9 states provide protection when donors donate directly to individuals, right? Because there are some issues, right? There are some gaps right now in our liability protection laws, both on the federal and the state level. So one of the big gaps is there's some unanswered questions, right? What does it mean to meet all quality and labeling rules, right? Ideally, we have some government agency that is going to provide guidance to tell businesses, because otherwise, right, as we mentioned, it's really easy to throw food in the trash, and it's hard to donate. And so if there are liability fears associated with donating, we know that more than 50% of companies don't donate because of liability fears. There's also lack of awareness, right? We have these laws, but people may not even know that they're out there, right? And then even if they know that they're out there, they may have these unanswered questions. And then we also have these gaps, right? There are these gaps in the federal, in particular the federal law, but also our state laws, like for instance, direct donation. So if I, as a business, want to donate directly to someone, I don't want to go through a food recovery org, you know, that is not covered. So what do we recommend, right? So say you're, you know, working with a state and you want to tackle this, maybe potentially you're someone in Virginia who's really excited to try to get a law passed. And I know you guys will hear about that in just a bit. We have a number of recommendations. We want to see a law that covers a broad range of donors, right? So individuals, businesses, schools, governments, you know, we want to see a law that covers donations made directly to individuals. Again, this direct donation, which the federal government doesn't cover. We want to see it explicitly call out and mention that it covers past state food, right? We want to see that it covers donations even if there's a small fee charged, right? And again, this is like we're seeing these sorts of organizations pop up in Massachusetts, but food recovery costs money. And so, you know, maybe an organization doesn't have the capacity to completely give away food, but they can offer meals for $1 or $2 or $3. And lastly, we want to make sure that any sort of requirements that, you know, we need compliance with, particularly around labeling, is only safety requirements and not quality, right? So a great example of this is, you know, we were talking with a grocery store and they had to throw out all this meat because the labels were wrong. But the labels weren't wrong about safety. It wasn't wrong about, you know, what was the safety date on the labels. The issue was that the meat was mislabeled in terms of the net weight. You know, they had said it was a half a pound, but it was actually a quarter of a pound, right? Like, that's a really bad reason to have to throw out meat. And so we want to be clear that, like, yes, you need to comply with any labeling requirements that are associated with safety, but, like, other than that, you know, let's not throw out food because, you know, we made a typo on a label. For those of you who are interested, Tennessee's law is a model here. It's, you know, one of the best that we found. You know, happy, again, if people are interested to get in more on that, dig in more and talk to you about what we like about the Tennessee law and, you know, how, again, if you're interested, how you can model a law after that. Again, just want to briefly talk about some recently introduced legislation. We've seen some good legislation introduced in Hawaii, New Jersey, and also Virginia, but I don't want to steal their thunder, so stay tuned. But also there is my favorite, which was introduced federally, which is H5684, which would amend the Bill Emerson Act, which is the federal law, to protect donation of pet products. So I didn't realize that was an issue, but to the extent that it is, don't worry, your congresspeople are here to protect you and Fido and to make sure that, you know, you guys can donate kibble to, you know, your local ASPCA. So moving on, what's the next issue? So we've talked about you know, we've talked about liability protections, which people are worried about, you know, getting sued. But another issue is tax incentives, right? Donation isn't free. It costs money to donate compared to throwing food in the trash. So how can we, you know, make businesses and companies, how can we incentivize them to donate? Well, we can use our tax system. And again, this is an area where we do have some federal, we do already have federal legislation. You know, we have both a general deduction and enhanced deduction. That's a tax incentive. These are both, you know, both incentives to help people, you know, to encourage people to donate food. Tax incentives make food donation more cost-effective and economically beneficial. You know, but in addition to the federal donation, and one interesting thing is that actually when we look at globally, our federal tax deduction is actually very strong compared to other policies we see across the globe, but there's still a lot of room for states to improve and to innovate. And we've seen this where we have 11 states who have also passed state-level tax incentives. So I'll pull up a little map of the states that we've seen that have tax incentives. We're seeing a lot of activity, right? We have a lot of our coastal states, but also some states right in the heartland. We have Missouri, Iowa, South Carolina, Arizona, are among our 11 states that offer tax incentives specifically targeted at food recovery efforts. When we think about what recommendations are, one of the things that's really great about a state-level tax incentive is that it can be structured in a million different ways, and it can be structured exactly in the way that will help that state the most, right? I think the one guidance that we're always going to offer, the thing that is most important, and if you only remember one thing about state tax incentives, remember this: please, please, please structure it as a credit rather than a deduction. So a credit is a dollar-for-dollar reduction in someone's tax bill, right? So if you owe $100 in taxes, but you have a $50 tax credit, all of a sudden your tax bill is $50, right? Whereas a deduction is a reduction in your taxable income, right? So say you earned $100 and you have a $50 deduction, then you're paying taxes on $50 of income rather than $100. But one of the things that we all know is that a lot of our food businesses, and in particular our farms, are super low margin businesses. They frankly may not be making enough money to really benefit from a deduction, particularly if they're in a super low tax bracket. So a credit is just going to be a lot more valuable to them than a deduction. Other things that's really important to know is, to offer that incentive even if the nonprofit ultimately charges for food. Again, we talked about this in the liability context, but it is really helpful just to have, to have the ability to charge small dollars for food that, to the ultimate recipient of food that is donated. Again, we should target these incentives to structure the incentives to fit local needs, right? Maybe if you want to focus on farms, focus on farms. If you want to focus on distributors or retailers, focus on distributors or retailers. You can, target the incentive to specific barriers. California is really a model here because they actually have two tax incentives. One is just for the value of the good that is donated, right? So for farmers or whoever donating food, they can sort of get a credit for the amount that they've donated. But there's also a specific tax incentive for transportation, because we know that particularly in rural states, transportation costs and logistics can be a significant barrier, right? So like maybe you have all this farm on the food, maybe it's even already harvested, but you need to get it from your farm, in the Inland Empire to Los Angeles. That could be a lot of money in gas and a lot of time. So offering a tax credit to offset those transportation costs can really significantly increase donations. And again, for those who are interested in seeing the model, I think California is a really great model. I also think that, again, you're going to really want to target this to fit whatever makes sense for your own state or locality. And we've seen some recently introduced legislation. We've seen stuff in Massachusetts, Maine, Illinois. We actually had 5 bills introduced last year around tax incentives, and thankfully, except for Massachusetts, which is obviously where we are, everything else was tax credits rather than deduction. So at least some people are hearing our plea. And so next up is the issue of food safety. Again, I just want to clarify that the issue is not that people are donating unsafe food. The issue is that food safety requirements can actually act as a disincentive to donate food. And again, the more we can make it easy and seamless to donate food, the more businesses are going to. So the federal government doesn't really play much of a role in food safety. It happens mostly at the state and local level. But one thing that the federal government does do is they promulgate something called the FDA Food Code, which is like a model language around food safety that ends up in state codes. One of the things that's really unfortunate is that federal code doesn't provide any guidance around donation. It doesn't talk about donation. And in general, one of the things that happens is that we know that health inspectors, who are the ones that end up enforcing these rules, are really risk averse. So if the federal code doesn't say that you can, they essentially assume that you cannot. So we recently did a 50-state survey around food safety and food donation. And what we found was the vast majority of states did not at all address food donation in their food safety codes or in any guidance. We found that 12 states who did, but they tended, even in these 12 states that had something in their laws or 14 states that had something in their guidance, it tended to be very narrow. So for example, like Alaska had something just about donating wild deer meat, right? But, didn't have something in general. And part of the issue is that if it's not called out, essentially a lot of people are going to assume that you're not allowed to do it. And again, we talk to people who work for state health agencies and food inspectors, and we ask them, like, hey, would it be more helpful to have more information about, food safety issues associated with food donation? And pretty much everyone said yes. And so we're hard at work on this. We're, trying to get it included in the FDA food code. I think that would be our dream scenario. But in the interim, there's actually a lot that states can do. In particular, state health departments, you can work on making your food safety regulations more donation friendly. In particular, by creating a donation specific section, you can provide clarity over which foods may be donated and which may not. So for example, you might say, hey, anything that's temperature, has a safety issue, it needs to be temperature controlled, that can be donated, but if it's donated, it has to be maintained at the correct temperature. You can explicitly state what labeling requirements are for donated food, right? We don't want to be adding a burden, but, maybe if someone wants to donate food from the buffet line, you need to include the ingredients just so that, people are aware of allergen issues. You can release guidance and guidance documents on the requirements to help educate donors. And then, obviously this is a huge issue, training health inspectors on the guidance, because the health inspectors really are the front line of this issue, and they have a significant impact on sort of like the day-to-day operations of food businesses, right? For those of you who are like, yes, I want to do this, where should I look? Texas's section in its food code is a great model. It has a lot of these different, it addresses a lot of these issues and really does it in a way where all the information is available in one place, which is just such a benefit for food businesses. So I know I'm coming to the end of my time, but I do just want to talk about one thing that we are really excited about and are starting to see more of, and that is donation requirements or waste bans. So these are sort of holistic. They cover all sorts of elements associated with food waste and recovery. The default, again, is to just throw food away in the landfill. So what these bills do is they mandate, like they either ban and say, hey, you cannot throw food in the landfill, or they may mandate what you have to do. So if it's organics recycling law, it might mandate composting. We're starting to see some donation requirements. So California actually has a goal that 20% of all edible foods is going to be donated by 2025. And we're seeing a lot of motion here. So 9 states and 10 major municipalities have organic waste bans or donation requirements. And of these, they've really been passed in the last 5 to 10 years. So they're really brand new. I can show you a map of where they are. They're clustered in our, on our coast. But one of the things that's been really exciting to see is we're starting to get proof of concept of like not just the environmental impacts from reduced greenhouse gas and methane emissions, but also a lot of economic benefits. So in Massachusetts, there's been studies shown that the organic waste ban has created over 500 jobs and brought $175 million to the state. Again, because we should not be throwing away food that is healthy and wholesome. And so these are just really, for me, seeing this sort of stuff, and in particular the addition of the donation requirement, is really just been sort of pushing the bar in terms of what these laws can do and what laws can do in general around food waste. So what are some of the best practices for state legislation and recommendations? Require donation and recycling of food, right? Like obviously it would be great if, if all we can do is compost, that's good. But if we can, instead of composting, we can require donation of food or food being fed to livestock, even better. Cover the maximum number of generators, like avoid having a lot of exemptions. There are some places that in order to cover more generators have done a tiered approach. We saw that in California where there's tier 1 and tier 2, and over time more and more people are getting pulled into the requirements. If possible, include residential pickup, right? Like make it curbside composting, like the same way that we have curbside trash and recycling. Ideally, try to not include any waivers or exemptions. Again, I can get into it a bit more about why some places have waivers and exemptions. And offer education and guidance for generators. I want to just give a little bit of a shout out to Washington State, who recently passed their organic waste ban. Very, very exciting. Requires residential composting by localities by 2027, local government compost procurement to really create a market for compost, helping siting organic processing facilities. There's a liability protection included. There's edible food donation requirement. It's just really, in my mind, one of the strongest laws we've seen passed to date. So it's super, super exciting. So as I mentioned, I'm running towards the end of my time, but I do know there's going to be a whole day on K-12 schools, so I won't talk about that too briefly or too much, except to say that if you're interested in it, Rhode Island has an amazing law. It was passed really recently. I would love to talk with you about it. If you're interested, come reach out. A little bit on broader policy trends, we're seeing a lot more bills introduced on state and local food waste, which is really exciting for us to see this momentum happening. Overall, last year we saw 99 bills on food loss and waste introduced. This is just sort of a heat map of where we're seeing bills introduced. Again, a lot on the coast, but we're seeing a lot of action as well in the Midwest, Florida, very exciting stuff. This is just a distribution of the topics of bills that we're seeing introduced. And also we're seeing some activity on the federal level, where just last week we saw Representative Brown out of Ohio introduce the Find Food Act, which is an act to incentivize food donations on the federal level. I mentioned our Date Labeling Act. There was a lot of great stuff for the first time in the 2018 Farm Bill, and we're hoping to see similar stuff happen in the 2023 Farm Bill. And again, just wanted to put a plug in for our global work, because maybe you've heard me talking this whole time and you said, wait, Molly, you didn't mention this really cool idea I have. Well, one of the great things is that because we're working across the globe now, we're starting to see what best practices look like in other countries, and learning about, what they've done around food waste and recovery. And frankly, there's a lot that the U.S. could learn from other countries. And so we've been glad to start to do this sort of cross-sectional global project. And so with that, I'm gonna pass it off. But my one sort of last thing I want to leave you all with is, as I mentioned, we're a clinic, we're experiential learning. We work with state, local, federal governments, NGOs, community groups. If this inspires you and you're ready to go pass a state law, or you want to work on guidance around some issue, or you just have questions, please feel free to reach out. I'll drop my email in the chat. You also have our email here. But we are so excited to work with all of our clients, and would love to help you start trying to tackle issues of food waste in your own communities. And with that, I will pass it off.
Thank you so much, Molly. We have a couple questions, but we will wait to the very end to ask those to you. Next, I would like to introduce we talked about the group of high school students that are really putting in a lot of work for food waste awareness, and so I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but I'm going to pass the presenting capabilities over to you, and the floor is yours.
Oh, is it hello? Hello. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, we can. Let me get to you.
Okay, awesome. So hi. Do you know where our slides? Yeah, that's it. Okay. Sorry, we're just trying to get this. Okay. Oh, okay. Do you think you can go to our slides? I think it's still on the other one.
Yeah, just you guys have the presenting capabilities, so just keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, sorry. Well, hi guys. That was really cool, Miss Code. We definitely got lots of our information from there. So lots of the stuff that we saw, we were like, oh my gosh, that's awesome things about. We know. So next time around, you'll be seeing lots of stuff about Virginia, hopefully.
Yeah.
So yes. So first, this is what we're going to be talking about. This is about who we are.
So it's a group of 4 of us. Matt couldn't make it, but I'm Kaden Braswell. I am a junior at Pennsylvania High School, and I'm in the Environmental Studies program, and I also am in the Virginia Beach Clean Community Commission.
And I'm Natalia de los Rios. I go to Princess Anne High School in the International Baccalaureate program, and also I go to the Environmental Studies program at the Brock Center.
And I'm Ure, and I go to Princess Anne High School. And we are at the Environmental Studies program right now. That's where they all have like met and stuff, so that's how we got involved.
Yeah.
So I guess more about what got us interested. So first with food rescue.
Yeah, so about 2 years ago, I started the Virginia Beach chapter of Food Rescue US, which is basically a very, it's a direct delivery model where we're picking up excess food from like restaurants and businesses and farms, and we're bringing it directly to like food pantries and subsidized elderly housing facilities and things of that nature. So at the same time, we're trying to address the issue of food waste with the issue of food insecurity and making sure that the food is filling plates and not landfills. And so we'll get into this a little bit more later, but that's kind of where we got the inspiration for creating a bill that tackled the issue of best by dates in regards to food donation liability protection. Just based on some of the observations I had as a site director, where I would be going to different businesses and having like conversations with them about some issues that were pertinent to them.
Yeah, with food rescue, like for example, like every Sunday I get food from Panera and I take it to this church in Chesapeake, Virginia, and so it's always like the excess food, and like there's so much food, like we heard with like the Harvard policy presentation. So obviously, like with food rescue, it's so cool. It's always like a bunch of our friends like going to volunteer. So yeah, we are really happy with that.
The Environmental Studies program, it's a academy within Virginia Beach City Public Schools that teaches a small amount of juniors and seniors about the environment and climate change and natural ecosystems. And we don't learn by reading out of a textbook. We actually go outside and learn about it. And we were, basically how this whole thing kind of came about is we were told to get involved in the community. And we'll get into this later, but we all kind of put our ideas together and our interests together, and we also recruited Ure from outside of the Environmental Studies program and did a thing.
Yeah. So I wish I was in the Environmental Studies program, but I'm not. I just like love coming. Like today they were learning about like bees, and they're just always like out and like doing stuff, and it's so cool rather than sitting in a classroom. So it's so cool. And I guess with me, how I got involved, I have lots of interest with like politics and policy more on like a social level. So especially with this, I really wanted to get involved because food waste and food liability protections does have its impact on communities, especially like to kind of balance the inequities that we see within food insecurity. But all of us, we take part in like campaigns and stuff, and that's how we got involved with some of the legislative stuff, especially with like Norfolk. That's where lots of our food rescue stuff was based, and that's where lots of food insecurity is. So yes. Yes, so inspiration.
I know personally, I saw a lot of the issue working at different restaurant jobs, and they would just throw out at the end of the night big trash cans and trash cans and trash cans of food when people literally outside clearly needed it. And that's how it kind of sparked the idea in my brain, and I also have an interest in policy. Natalia, Food Rescue.
So as site director of Food Rescue, part of my job was going to not only the partners that we already receive food from, but also the businesses that we would like them to start donating their food, or they have an interest in donating their food. And so the things that I was hearing a lot very frequently was that they had concerns regarding liability, and specifically, right, they would ask me, hey, if this food is past the best by date or past the date on the label, is it okay for me to donate it? And because the way that the Emerson Act was kind of vague in its language regarding like what wholesome food included, I couldn't say like explicitly you're protected. So that's where we wanted to create a state bill or a state law to clarify that, so that businesses have that peace of mind that they are able to do the right thing for the community at the same time that they can protect their businesses.
Yeah, I think. So yeah, here is a statistic, and I think actually before it was updated to like $1,800 per family now. But like as you can see, in 2020, 80 billion pounds of food was thrown away. So clearly there is
An issue.
yeah,
With the
There's
sustainability.
a problem.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the people touched on that, so we'll just go.
We'll skip past that.
So yeah, this is also something that like she talked about. But
Yeah, so just kind of going back to the confusion with the Best Buy dates, and I know Harvard kind of touched on this. We got a lot of our information like starting out from them, so we love you guys. So the Best Buy dates, it's something that's not regulated except for like baby formula, and I think in Virginia it's shellfish too. So there's a lot of confusion about what they mean specifically, and that extends to not only consumers but also to the businesses. And so what we found is a lot of businesses will print a date for like inventory purposes or something, and then not totally understand that that has more to do with the freshness of the food than it does with the safety. And so they have concerns or fear about donating that food because they don't, obviously nobody wants anybody to get sick, and they think that might correlate to liability risks. But so that's kind of where we wanted to improve that area that's causing food waste and not helping the issue of food insecurity by creating policy.
yeah, and there's obviously just a lot of misconceptions with Best Buy dates, especially like with the bill. We're going to get into like where it is at right now, but there's places like fast food restaurants where there's actually like a 7-day window. So if we're able to really like develop this and be able to like really get all the excess food from like everywhere and be able to get it to people's plates, because this issue, like she said, like with the what food was she talking about? I don't remember. Like
Shellfish and baby formula.
yeah, like there's just like foods like with like pasta. I think it could be over 2 years past the Best Buy date. Lots of things that people just don't know about. So I think plus education and policy, that's really important.
Yeah. Our basic goal when we were thinking about what to do is we wanted to protect these businesses because Natalia has seen firsthand they turn away a lot of people who want to take in their food and donate it to people who need it because they're afraid that they're going to get sued. So our goal was basically to tell them that they're completely safe, because honestly nobody would be suing them anyway, like they're completely safe, but they're scared, they need to protect themselves, which is understandable. So we just wanted to clarify the Emerson Act because it's pretty vague, and a lot of times businesses don't really listen to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the early process.
Yeah, so in the very beginning, we had no expectation of actually getting anything back. It was maybe like 2-ish weeks before session started here. Very last minute. So we reached out to a couple policy experts from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and policymakers in Richmond and lobbyists, and they kind of they gave us like that professional insight into how we can actually make this happen.
Yeah.
And also we had a variety of different policy ideas, and they helped us narrow down what they thought would be the most tangible to achieve in the current political climate of Virginia's General Assembly.
Yeah.
And so from there we formulated a one-pager which had all of our information and our general idea. And we sent it out to maybe probably every senator and delegate, honestly. And we started cold calling, like we were just doing everything, emailing,
down to business.
yeah. And it was the day before, it was really the week before when before session started, when we started getting patron offers, and it was kind of crazy because we got like 2 at the same time, and then we got another possible one. So that helped us blend it into a beautiful like bipartisan bill, which was really great to see. All these parties like working together on something that's like really a nonpartisan issue.
Yeah, so I guess like the result of that, Delegate Elizabeth Bennett Parker and Glenn Davis were like the 2 people that we got at the same time. And like with that, I guess we just learned a lot. Like Delegate Elizabeth Bennett Parker was a freshman delegate, a Democrat, and Delegate Glenn Davis was a Republican. So we really, like, both of them on the same bill was really like the best of both worlds. Like we were able to get that bipartisanship with someone new. Miss Bennett Parker was very into like environmental like subjects, so she was really able to aid us, and Delegate Glenn Davis had the experience, so that was really good. And then after we got some more, like this delegate Jackie Glass came on. That's like, we worked on her campaign. She was the new delegate from Norfolk.
A special election.
Yeah, for the special election. So she was so amazing. Like,
So sweet.
yeah, all those people were incredibly helpful. And then after we presented, Delegate Dan Helmer came on, Senator Linwood, people started seeing like what we were doing and really wanted to get involved and onto that bill. So we really got our bipartisanship on there. We got more experience. I think Senator Linwood Lewis is one of the oldest like senators actually. So having someone that's that experienced is just really helpful. And yeah, we're really happy.
So these are just the bill's patrons and co-patrons. So we got co-patrons from both the House and the Senate. And our main patron is Delegate Davis, who is my district delegate.
Yes. Yeah, that was another thing. We were really lucky. They always say to reach out to your senator and your delegate first. So we're really happy that he was able to do that.
He really took a lot of time, honestly, to like talk to us and have conversations. Like, he would have hour-long conversations with us, and we were being told, like, this is not something that a lot of them will do, so we were very appreciative to have that respect for, like, our opinions and our ideas taken seriously.
It was so crazy, because, like, one day we were just high schoolers who had this idea, and we honestly just wanted to get a patron, or, like, a callback. That's all we wanted. And then, like, a week later, we're having this long Zoom meeting with Delegate Davis, and it was, like, surreal.
Yeah. So this was us at the House of Delegates. This is how
so we testified several times in both the House Agriculture Subcommittee and then the Senate Agriculture Committee. And at first, there was like a little bit of confusion about the bill and the language because they wanted to make sure it matched up with the Virginia Department of Health regulations and the language that they use. So it was definitely interesting to see that process of like having to make sure the bill's really clear, but also making sure that we align with the regulations that are already in place so that there's not confusion in that way. So it was definitely a big learning process, and there's a lot of like back and forth about, oh, could we add this? Could we take this out? And which is something that we hadn't really anticipated because all of a sudden we had all these like outside groups like the Virginia Department of Health and the Agribusiness Committee, and like and like different supermarkets like giving their input into the language and maybe certain aspects of the bill. So like all of a sudden having all that input and like working directly with the delegates to get this like in the best form possible was really a great learning experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I just want to say that like Kaden especially, like both of you guys, like I was not like sugarcoat this. Like there were times where like the delegates might not know as much as we do because we really did all the research in the food policy.
And they wouldn't listen to it.
Yeah, and they were like, strong on it. Like like Kaden was like, I think it should be this. And then once we got there, like the other delegates were like, wait, like there were just times where I think like there's a video where Natalia steps up and like says like all the correct information like correctly, but it's just like so cool because like when we really delved into this, like this was our like lives for like in like a month and like and we this is like all we like looked into, like there would be this like 100-page like Harvard document as well at the time. It always just send to us and like it was so much information. Like when you really get into this, you really get passionate about it, and it was just like, it was so cool. And I think even like Davis, like you see him like smiling in the back, if you just step back and be like, you guys got it. Because we really like,
it was very empowering, I would say, like to have our voice like, and have that authority to be there among like so many like professional people that can be like intimidating. I think we really got comfortable like being there, and we went up to Richmond a lot of times, and we went to all their offices and just around and like talking to them. So I think we got really comfortable with like talking to the delegates and the senators, which was something like at the very beginning we were like, oh my god, we have a Zoom meeting with a delegate, or we're gonna call a delegate, but like by the end it was like, oh yeah, we got a meeting with them. So, like,
we definitely had an issue, like we would say, oh, we love Jackie, and it's like, wait, delegate Glass. We would just talk like, it was really cool. It was an amazing experience, and especially with what Ms. Cohen was talking about, like getting involved, like it's like life changing, and it's very much possible. where we are now.
Our bill has unanimously passed through the House of Delegates and the Senate, and it's been signed by the House Speaker and the Senate President. We're just waiting for Governor Youngkin to sign it, and the deadline is April 11th, so it's coming up, and it's getting nerve-wracking. And we've made a lot of connections. We've talked to a lot of people from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. That's like what the Environmental Studies program is like connected to. Like, we're connected to the Brock Center. We wrote a blog for NRDC. I'm in the Virginia Beach Clean Community Commission. We've had meetings with like Farm Lake and Refed. It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's what's outside of WHR.
Oh, that is such a terrible picture, but I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
And I thought it was like, honestly, just like
A good candid thought of
real.
like the things that have been happening that are kind of like crazy when we think about
Yes.
it. Like, and I think moving into the future, we're definitely looking at doing more policy for next year.
Yeah.
And looking at some of the federal issues, and also in regards to regulations and how that affects like the cafeteria, and how they can work with like food waste and food insecurity, and how they have more access and more resources going into those programs.
Yeah.
And also looking at expanding organic waste composting, because I think having access to that infrastructure is something that Virginia really needs overall.
Mhm.
I know in our area we don't really have anything, and we're a pretty big city for Virginia. So looking at those steps, even with like tax incentives and everything with that too, at those steps that we can be achieving to work our way up to like an organic waste ban.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, that is it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It's
you
an honor to
so
be included.
Oh my God. Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies, so much for talking about, well, first off, just for what you do and being a big part, and you know, really being involved. I wish that I would have been as involved as y'all are at the age that you guys are. So I'm excited to see what comes of it and all that you do in the future. So thanks for coming on and letting us know about the great work that you guys do. We had a couple questions come in, so I know we've only got a couple minutes left before this webinar is over, but wanted to go ahead and ask those. I think the first ones are for Molly. Let's see. It says, how do we who advocate for food rescue convince soup kitchens and charities to accept food with past date labels? Many have policies preventing receipt of expired food.
That's a great point, and I think it's one that we do really need to focus on, because of course, even if we pass a bill saying, hey, you can, it's okay to donate food with past date labels, if your food recovery organizations are not willing to accept them, or ultimate recipients are not gonna are gonna feel disrespected by that, then then this is not going to work. I do really think a lot of this comes down to sort of education and awareness. I think if some of the food recovery orgs had been in the meetings we've been in with, food industry, stakeholders and manufacturers, where they sort of admit that date labels don't really mean anything, they might start to feel a bit differently about it. Again, I think this is also an opportunity where we can really leverage the government apparatus, and that if we have a state health department or a local health department promulgating guidance that they think it's fine to donate and to eat food past date labels, then I think food recovery orgs will get, will hopefully get more comfortable. But ultimately, like, they are a key part of this puzzle, and there's somebody that we need to bring along in this work. And if we're passing all these laws but not really addressing them and their concerns, then frankly, we aren't doing our job. So I think that's a really, really important question to bring up. And, something that when we're looking at these sorts of liability protections or tax incentives, we always need to be talking to the stakeholders that are going to be impacted, and make sure that they're on board with the change. And also, I just want to say I was so inspired to hear that Virginia, all you guys talk about your work in Virginia. I wish, like Caleb, I wish I had half your pep and vigor when I was a high school student.
Thanks, Molly. We have another one that says, for states that don't have a state income tax, do you have examples of what to tie the tax credit to? And then also it says also in terms of actual revenue impacts to states from these credits, are you aware of any resources out there that include this information? So I guess that's a two-part. I don't know how you want to answer that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And in terms of states that don't have state income tax, we only have 11 states right now that have tax incentives, and I haven't seen any come in a state that doesn't have a state income tax. And I do see how that would be. It's hard to figure out what the hook there could be. There may be some other hooks out there if there are any sort of other business taxes, or maybe there's sort of licensing fees. There's some, there might be a way to sort of offer an incentive, but I can't think of anything that's like super easy or obvious off the top of my head. But I'd love, if someone's thinking about a particular state that they want to try to tackle, please reach out, because I'd love to. I think this would be a really interesting issue to try to solve. And in terms of revenue impacts, if you wait a second, I'll drop you a link from California, which has one of the, like as I mentioned, one of the ones that I think is most, is a model. And there's a report from their franchise tax board that goes through year by year what the revenue impacts are. And honestly, for better or for worse, the revenue impacts aren't super huge, which on the one hand is a bummer, because it means that, the tax incentives aren't being used a ton. But on the other hand, maybe a plus in that there won't necessarily be huge revenue impacts if you're trying to, if you're trying to push this in front of a state legislature. So if you'll wait 1 second, I'll just drop that into the chat.
All right, and while you're doing that, there's a couple things that just came in, not really questions, but just audience members saying, love to hear from our students about their passion and progress. You all are incredible, inspiring adults and students to take the first step. And I could just second that. You got just all the work that you guys do is so inspiring, and just very thankful for being able to hear it, and being able to have a platform like this to share it. Let's see.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And also, just so everyone knows, these webinars, this morning's webinar and then this one were recorded and will be available. I'll be sending out a follow-up email for everybody that registered for this one and the one earlier this morning with the link to the recording. So you can show it to other people, or if there's something that you didn't get to take notes on and wanted to listen again, you can rewatch that. I'll hopefully be sending that out mid to late this week.
Caleb, I'm also going to add that we will have all the recordings on the Save the Food FL or Food Waste Prevention Week website.
All right. Molly, did you say that you were going to send that in the chat?
Yeah, I should have just dropped it in the chat. Hopefully you guys saw, but just in case people are interested, in California in 2018, it was about $500,000 worth of credits that were claimed. In 2019, 2020, it was about 1.5 million. So, that's our largest agricultural producing state, having that much. So if you're in a smaller state or a state where you think the impact might be smaller, expect those numbers to be smaller.
Well, thank you so much, Molly. It was very nice to be able to hear how policy plays a role in reducing food waste, and then to see it in action with the students, and gives hope that food waste, hopefully the prevention of food waste is in a younger generation. So thanks everybody for being a part of this. And stay tuned for more of the series that's going on later today and for the rest of the week.
Thanks so much for having me.